The air in the hospital room was thick with grief as I watched my father's chest rise and fall for the last time. My sister Claire stood on the opposite side of the bed, tears streaming down her face. Tears I once believed were genuine. We had always been different. She was the golden child. I was the afterthought. When my mother passed away 5 years earlier, Dad became our last connection to each other. Now, as the machines fell silent, I didn't just lose my father. I lost my final anchor to a family that had always made me feel unwanted. "I'll take care of everything," Claire whispered, squeezing my shoulder. Her touch felt cold, rehearsed. Something in her eyes didn't match her sympathetic voice. I nodded, too broken to argue. That was my first mistake. What I didn't know then was that Claire had been meeting with my father in private for months. While I drove him to chemotherapy appointments and organized his medications, she had been whispering poison into his ear. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had convinced our dying father that I was stealing from him, that I was waiting for him to die so I could cash in. Nothing could have been further from the truth. I had put my entire life on hold to care for him, while Claire visited only when it was convenient. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from Dad's lawyer. "I need to see both you and Claire immediately," he said, his voice unnaturally formal. I arrived at his office early, my hands trembling as I clutched a coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. When Claire walked in, designer clothes, perfect hair, not a trace of grief, something inside me knew. And when the lawyer read the will, my world collapsed entirely. Dad had changed everything just 2 weeks before his death. The house, the savings, the family business, everything went to Claire. I was left with $5,000 and a note that read, "For services rendered." I was treated like the maid, not his daughter. As Claire smiled smugly across the table, I realized I'd been completely erased from the will, erased from the family, erased from my father's heart with a few poisonous words. What Claire didn't know was that I had been recording our father's final days, not for evidence, but to preserve his voice, his wisdom, his final thoughts for the dark days I knew would follow. Those recordings would change everything. Let me know in the comments. Which country or city are you watching this from? The lawyer's office fell silent as I stared at my sister's triumphant face. I could barely breathe as the reality sank in. My father had died believing I was stealing from him. "Is there anything else?" Claire asked the lawyer, already gathering her designer purse, ready to walk away with everything our parents had built. The lawyer shook his head. "That concludes the reading." My sister didn't even look at me as she strutted out. She had won, or so she thought. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, paralyzed with grief and betrayal. My phone buzzed repeatedly, my husband Michael trying to reach me. We had postponed having children so I could care for my father. We had drained our savings. We had put everything on hold. And for what? To be called worthless by implication? To be thrown away like garbage? When I finally answered Michael's call, I couldn't speak through my sobs. "I'm coming to get you," was all he said. That night, as I lay curled up on our sofa, something my father had said during his more lucid days came back to me. "Truth always finds a way, Ellie." It was then I remembered the recordings. For months, I had kept my phone nearby, capturing Dad's stories about his childhood, his advice, his regrets. I hadn't listened to them since his death. It was too painful. But now, with trembling hands, I opened the audio files. The first few recordings were what I expected. Dad talking about meeting Mom, his pride in the business he built from nothing, his hopes for his grandchildren he would never meet. But then I found something unexpected. A conversation from 3 months ago, before Claire had started her campaign of lies. "I'm worried about Claire." My father's weak voice crackled through the speaker. "She's asking about the will again. Keeps suggesting you're only here for the money." "I know that's not true, Ellie. You've always been the one with the biggest heart." My breath caught. I scrolled through more files, listening with growing disbelief. There was Dad, confused after taking his pain medication, with Claire's voice in the background. "Dad, remember what we talked about? About Ellie taking money from your account? You need to call your lawyer." Then my father's slurred response, "But Ellie wouldn't. She's never..." And Claire cutting him off. You're just protecting her like always. I have proof. I'll show you tomorrow. For now, just call your lawyer. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. Another recording. Claire, thinking I had left the house, telling Dad that she had found bank statements showing withdrawals I had made. Withdrawals that never existed. My father, too weak to verify anything himself, his mind clouded by medication and pain, had believed her. In his vulnerable state, she had manipulated him completely. But the most damning evidence came from just 5 days before he died. I had set my phone to record while I went to pick up his prescription, leaving him resting. I hadn't known Claire would visit during that short window. Her voice was crystal clear. I've taken care of everything, Dad. The new will is signed. Ellie won't get anything significant. It's safer that way until we figure out exactly how much she's taken. Don't worry, I'll make it right after you're gone. My father's response broke my heart all over again. But what if you're wrong about her, Claire? What if— I'm not wrong, she had interrupted. Trust me, she's been planning this for years. Now rest? I've got everything under control. I played the recordings 3 times, my hands shaking with rage and vindication. Claire hadn't just lied. She had orchestrated a complete betrayal during our father's most vulnerable moments. She had stolen not just my inheritance, but my father's trust in his final days. As I stared at my phone, this unexpected weapon of truth, I realized I had exactly what I needed. The next morning, I called my father's lawyer and requested an urgent meeting. His secretary initially refused, saying all matters related to the estate were now in Claire's hands. That's when I said the magic words. It's about evidence of coercion and manipulation of a terminally ill man. I have recordings. The meeting was scheduled for the following day. That night, as I carefully organized the audio files, my phone lit up with a text from Claire. I'm selling Dad's house next week. If there's anything sentimental you want, come get it tomorrow. Consider it generosity. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. She wasn't just taking everything. She was erasing our family history without a second thought. I didn't respond. She had no idea what was coming. As I prepared to leave for the lawyer's office the next morning, another text arrived from Claire. Actually, don't bother coming to the house. I've decided to have everything cleared out professionally. Too many memories. That was the moment something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about justice for my father, whose final days had been poisoned by lies. This was about making her pay for what she had done to him, and to me. With the recording safely backed up in 3 different places, I drove to the meeting that would change everything, unaware that my sister had one more devastating card to play. The lawyer's office felt different this time. I was no longer the devastated daughter, but a woman with purpose. Mr. Greenberg, my father's attorney for 20 years, looked exhausted when I arrived. Before we begin, there's something you should know, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Your sister called this morning. She mentioned you might try to contest the will with some recordings. She said you've been unstable since your father's diagnosis. My blood ran cold. Of course, Claire would try to discredit me before I could even present my evidence. Unstable? I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. I have recordings of her manipulating our heavily medicated father into changing his will based on lies she invented. Mr. Greenberg's expression remained carefully neutral. I'll listen, but I should warn you. Contesting wills is extremely difficult. Your father was examined by a doctor who certified he was of sound mind when he made the changes. A doctor Claire selected, I countered. Please, just listen. For the next hour, the office filled with my father's weakened voice, Claire's calculated manipulations, and the unmistakable sound of a dying man being poisoned against his daughter. As the recordings played, Mr. Greenberg's professional facade cracked. By the final recording, where Claire explicitly mentioned the new will and admitted she would make it right after he was gone, the lawyer was taking furious notes. This complicates things, he said when we finished. If these recordings are authenticated, we have a strong case for undue influence. But your sister will fight this aggressively. I'm counting on it, I replied. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from Claire's attorney demanding I cease all harassment and defamation regarding the will. They called my recordings alleged and potentially illegally obtained. They threatened countersuits if I proceeded. Claire was scared, exactly as I'd hoped. What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of legal maneuvers. My recordings were authenticated by an audio expert. Claire hired her own expert, who claimed they could have been edited. The court appointed a neutral third party who confirmed their authenticity. Claire's lawyer requested a psychiatric evaluation of me. The judge denied it, each move more desperate than the last. The day before our scheduled court date, I received an unexpected call from my Uncle Robert, my father's brother. "I need to see you," he said, his voice grave. We met at a small cafe where he slid a folder across the table. "Your father sent me this 3 days before he died. I've been overseas and just returned. He made me promise to give it to you if anything seemed wrong." Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. As I read his shaky handwriting, tears streamed down my face. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I fear my suspicions were correct. Claire showed me bank statements yesterday, withdrawals I supposedly authorized to you. But the signatures, they didn't look right. I was too weak to argue, but I know your heart. If I've made a terrible mistake with the will, forgive me. I've enclosed the original statements Claire showed me. Look closely at the signatures, as I finally did. I love you always, Dad." I stared at the bank statements. The signatures were forged. Clumsily, obviously forged. My father had realized the truth in his final days, but had been too weak to fix what had been done. My hands trembled as I showed my uncle. "She faked these. She showed these to Dad when he was heavily medicated." "I know," he said quietly. "Your father called me the night before he died. He was confused, but worried he'd been manipulated. I promised I'd help make it right." Armed with this final piece of evidence, I walked into court the next morning. Claire sat across the aisle, dressed in somber designer black, playing the role of the grieving daughter. When she saw Uncle Robert enter behind me, her face drained of color. She hadn't known he was back in the country. She hadn't known about the letter. The judge was a stern, older woman who listened impassively as our attorneys presented their arguments. When my lawyer played the recordings, Claire's confident facade began to crack. When he presented my father's letter and the forged bank statements, she leaned over frantically to whisper to her attorney. But it was the final revelation that destroyed her completely. My lawyer called a surprise witness, my father's night nurse from his final week. "Ms. Williams, did you witness any conversations between Claire Hoffman and her father regarding his will or his other daughter, Eleanor?" The nurse nodded solemnly. "On the night before Mr. Hoffman died, his daughter Claire thought he was sleeping. She was on the phone in his room, speaking quietly. I heard her say, 'It's done. She gets nothing. Once he's gone, everything is mine, just like we planned.' When she realized I was in the doorway, she hung up immediately." Claire shot to her feet. "She's lying. That's not—" "Sit down, Ms. Hoffman," the judge ordered sharply. "You'll have your chance to respond." But when that chance came, Claire's carefully constructed story fell apart under questioning. She couldn't explain the forged signatures. She couldn't explain why she'd told our father I was stealing when no money was missing. When pressed about who she'd been speaking to on the phone that final night, she refused to answer. By mid-afternoon, the judge called a recess. Claire's attorney approached mine, requesting a private meeting. I knew what was coming. They wanted to settle. As we gathered in a conference room, I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Behind her perfect appearance, I saw something I'd never noticed before: fear. "We're prepared to offer a 50-50 split of all assets," her lawyer began. I shook my head. "No." Claire leaned forward. "Don't be ridiculous, Ellie. This is more than fair. It's not about the money," I said quietly. "It's about what you did to Dad. His final days should have been peaceful. Instead, you made him doubt the daughter who was actually there for him. You poisoned his last moments on Earth with lies." "What do you want then?" Claire asked, her voice hollow. I placed my phone on the table and pressed record. One final recording to end this chapter of betrayal. I want the truth. Tell me why, Claire. Tell me why you did this to your own father and sister. For several long moments, Claire stared at my phone. her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the conference room table. The lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, her mask cracked. "You want the truth?" she hissed, leaning forward. "Fine. You were always his favorite. Always. Ellie is so responsible. Ellie is so caring. Why can't you be more like your sister, Claire? My entire life, I was compared to you. But what did being the good daughter get you? A life of servitude. I refuse to be that person." I sat motionless, stunned by the venom in her voice. "That doesn't explain forging documents and lying to our dying father." A bitter laugh escaped her. "You still don't get it, do you? Dad built that company for us to run together, but he always meant for you to have control. Claire's too impulsive, too focused on herself," he told me once. He didn't think I heard him. I've spent 15 years working in that company, making connections, building our client base, while you pursued your teaching career. But when it came time for succession planning, guess who he wanted in charge? "That's not true," I whispered, though a sinking feeling told me it might be. Dad had mentioned several times that he wished I would join the family business. 2 years ago, Claire continued, her voice dropping, I overheard him talking to his estate planner. He was restructuring everything to give you controlling interest, even though you've never spent a day working there. "Ellie will make the right decisions," he said. That's when I knew I needed to protect myself. By destroying his trust in me? By breaking his heart? Claire's eyes hardened. I did what was necessary, and I would have made it right eventually. Made it right? How exactly? I would have given you something. Maybe the house. I just needed to secure the company first. My lawyer interrupted then, reminding us that everything was being recorded. Claire's attorney quickly suggested we take a break, but I couldn't look away from my sister. "You know what hurts the most?" I asked quietly. "Not the money or the property. It's that you stole Dad's peace in his final days. He died believing I had betrayed him." Something flickered across Claire's face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "We should continue this with the judge," she said coldly. When court resumed, everything happened with startling speed. Claire's attorney requested a brief recess to confer with his client, then announced they were withdrawing their objections to our petition. The judge, clearly surprised, asked Claire directly if she understood what this meant. "I do, Your Honor," she replied, her voice hollow. The judge didn't waste time. Based on the evidence presented and the respondent's withdrawal of objections, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of undue influence in the modification of Edward Hoffman's will, dated February 12th. The court hereby invalidates that document and reinstates the previous will dated November 3rd of last year. Additionally, given the evidence of forgery presented, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. Claire didn't look at me as she gathered her things. She didn't look at anyone. The original will was straightforward. The business would be jointly owned, with me having 51% controlling interest and Claire 49%. The house would go to me, as I had been living there while caring for Dad, and the financial assets would be split equally. It was fair, balanced, and exactly what our father had always intended. Outside the courthouse, Uncle Robert hugged me tightly. "Your father would be proud," he whispered. "Not just of the outcome, but of how you handled yourself." I nodded, too emotional to speak. Vindication felt different than I'd expected, less triumphant, more somber. Claire had already disappeared into a waiting car, likely to begin strategizing her defense against potential criminal charges. The district attorney would decide whether to pursue the forgery allegations, but my lawyer suspected they would. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 weeks later, I stood in my father's study, now my study, sorting through his papers. The company was running smoothly despite Claire's abrupt departure. She had taken a leave of absence while dealing with her legal troubles, and surprisingly, many of the client relationships she'd claimed were solely hers had remained loyal to the company. As I organized his files, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, tucked inside an old book. Another letter, written months before his death, before Claire's manipulations, before everything fell apart. "My dearest Ellie," it began, If you're reading this, I've finally lost my battle with this illness. I've tried to put my affairs in order, but there's something more important than assets and wills that I need to tell you. Your sister Claire has always struggled with feeling second best. I fear that in my attempts to protect the business, I may have deepened that wound. The company needs your steady hand, your integrity, qualities that have always defined you. But Claire needs something too. She needs to know her value isn't measured against yours. I'm asking you, when I'm gone, to find a way to heal this rift between you. Not for my sake, but for yours. Family is complicated, imperfect, and sometimes painful, but it's also irreplaceable. All my love, always, Dad. I sat with the letter for a long time, tears streaming down my face. Even then, he had known. Even then, he had been trying to protect us both. The next day, I asked my attorney about the criminal charges against Claire. "It's in the DA's hands now," she explained. "But as the primary victim, your opinion will carry significant weight." "What if I don't want to press charges?" Her eyebrows shot up. "After everything she did? The forgery alone?" "I know what she did," I interrupted gently. "But I also know what our father wanted." 2 days later, I sat across from the district attorney, explaining my decision. The civil court has already corrected the will. My sister has lost her standing in the company and the community. I believe that's punishment enough. That's unusually merciful, he noted, studying me carefully. I handed him a copy of my father's letter. I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it for him. And maybe a little for myself. The weekend after the charges were dropped, I drove to Claire's apartment. She opened the door looking nothing like the polished, confident woman I'd faced in court. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her face free of makeup. "Why?" she asked simply, not moving to let me in. "Because he asked me to," I replied, holding out the letter. She read it silently, her hands trembling slightly. "This doesn't change anything," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, it doesn't. What you did was unforgivable. But this isn't about forgiveness right now. It's about honoring his last wish." "Which is what? Pretending to be a happy family again?" I shook my head. "No. It's about finding a way forward. The company needs restructuring. We need someone to handle international clients. Someone who speaks 3 languages and knows the industry inside out." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're offering me a job? After everything? I'm offering you a path back. Not to what we had, that's gone, but to something new, something that honors both your contributions and his wishes." Why would you do this? I thought about my father's words, about family being complicated and imperfect, but irreplaceable. Because holding on to anger and resentment would mean she won anyway. Not the inheritance, but something more valuable. My peace, our father's legacy. Claire didn't respond immediately, but she stepped aside to let me in. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Those would take years if they ever came at all. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, Claire and I sat together at the head table during the company's anniversary dinner. We weren't friends, probably never would be again, but we had found a wary professional respect. The recording that had saved my inheritance remained in my safe, insurance against future betrayals, but also a reminder of how easily family bonds can break when poisoned by resentment and lies. As I looked out at the employees whose livelihoods depended on our ability to move forward, I realized that the true inheritance my father left wasn't the business or the house or the money. It was the lesson that justice and mercy aren't mutually exclusive, that sometimes the greater victory isn't in destroying your opponent, but in refusing to become what they tried to make you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.